Imagine someone who built their entire confidence on the belief that you would never walk away. Someone who truly thought you'd chase them, even when they disrespected you. Now picture the moment their universe collapses because you didn't. They expected reaction, drama, tears. What they got instead was silence, and silence rewired everything. If you've ever pulled away from someone who expected endless forgiveness, tell me below. What changed the moment you stopped chasing? Narcissists expect pursuit because their entire emotional system is built on a fragile but powerful dependency, external validation. They don't just enjoy attention, they require it to feel real, important, and superior. Without it, their sense of self begins to shake. From the very beginning, they condition people to feed them with reassurance, admiration, and emotional energy. This pattern becomes their default expectation, and anyone who enters their world is quietly assigned the role of admirer, caretaker, or emotional provider. Their ego is not internally powered, it's externally charged, like a device that only turns on when plugged into someone else's attention. When a narcissist interacts with someone, they measure value based on how much that person responds, reacts, and revolves around them. If you show interest, they assume devotion. If you get upset, they interpret it as proof that you still care. Even your confusion or frustration is seen as a form of emotional investment. In their mind, any reaction from you validates their significance. This is why they push boundaries, play hot and cold games, create emotional confusion, and pull away strategically. They expect that these tactics will trigger you, pull you closer, or force you to chase them for clarity. Your pursuit reassures them that they are still the center of your emotional world. Their ego is built like a balloon, big, shiny, and empty. Every compliment, every apology you offer, every attempt to fix the relationship pumps air into that balloon. Without constant pumping, it deflates quickly. This is why narcissists rarely self-reflect. Self-reflection would require internal validation, and they haven't developed that skill. Instead, they rely on others to tell them they're lovable, powerful, or special. And when someone stops feeding them that emotional oxygen, they feel a sharp collapse inside, a sinking feeling they can't tolerate. So they expect people to chase them by default because it protects them from facing that collapse. In their worldview, losing someone never feels like losing a relationship. It feels like losing a source of psychological fuel. They assume you'll come back not because they believe you truly love them, but because they believe you can't function without them. That belief boosts their ego. It makes them feel irreplaceable. It gives them a sense of superiority they can't generate on their own. This is why your decision not to chase confuses them, destabilizes them, and forces them to confront a truth they've spent their whole life avoiding. Narcissists operate on predictable emotional cycles, and one of the most important parts of that cycle is control. They pull away, provoke reactions, create distance, or manufacture conflict because they believe it will trigger you to move toward them. This pattern reassures them that they still hold psychological power over you. But when you disappear, quietly, cleanly, without warning, you completely break that cycle. It's not just unexpected for them, it's destabilizing on a deeper level. They rely on the rhythm of the push-pull dynamic, and your silence abruptly removes the pull that keeps them feeling powerful. Their sense of superiority depends on you reacting exactly the way they anticipate. When you step out of the game, they lose the script. Breaking their control cycle has an immediate effect on their internal world. First comes confusion. They replay the last conversations, searching for signs of what went wrong. Then comes irritation, because their tactics are supposed to work. Then comes anxiety, not because they miss you emotionally, but because your disappearance proves that they don't have as much influence as they believed. Narcissists don't handle uncertainty well. Their entire identity depends on predictable validation from the people around them. Without that validation, they feel abandoned by their own power. It creates a kind of inner collapse, a temporary ego death that they scramble to reverse. Your silence also removes their ability to control the narrative. As long as they can provoke you, they can shape the story. They can turn themselves into the victim, the superior partner, or the misunderstood genius. But when you disappear, they lose their audience. They lose the emotional reactions they need in order to build a version of events where they still come out on top. And this loss makes them feel exposed. Their control cycle relies on you seeking answers, chasing clarity, or trying to restore peace. So when you stop playing along, their psychological power supply shuts off. They can't manipulate silence, they can't twist it, they can't spin it into praise, they can't use it to rebuild their ego. This disruption is often the first real experience of powerlessness they've felt in a long time. The cycle breaks because you replaced emotional reaction with emotional restraint. You replaced confusion with clarity. You replaced pursuit with distance. And once the cycle is broken, they're forced to face a reality they never imagined possible. Silence is something a narcissist is never prepared to deal with because silence removes their greatest source of power, your emotional response. They thrive on reactions, anger, confusion, sadness, frustration, even love. To them, every reaction is proof that they still matter, that they still have a grip on your mind. When you go silent, you take away the emotional mirror they depend on. Suddenly, they can't see their reflection in your reactions, and that creates an internal panic they don't know how to regulate. They feel invisible in a way that shakes their identity at its core. Silence exposes something they work endlessly to hide, their insecurity. As long as you respond, they can pretend they're superior, desired, and in control. But when you don't respond, their facade starts to crack. At first, they assume you're playing a game. They wait for you to break, then they wait longer. And when nothing happens, the narrative they built begins to fall apart. Silence forces them to confront the possibility that they miscalculated, that they lost someone who no longer needs their validation. This idea alone is enough to make them unravel internally. Your silence also removes their ability to manipulate. Narcissists rely on emotional chaos because chaos gives them leverage. If you're confused, you ask for answers. If you're hurt, you try to fix things. If you're angry, you defend yourself. Every reaction provides an opening for them to regain control. But silence is a closed door. They can't argue with it. They can't twist it. They can't use it against you. It's like they're punching into a void. No matter what they try, whether it's love bombing, guilt tripping, or baiting, you don't feed the fire. And without fuel, their sense of power burns out. Silence also forces them to face themselves, something they avoid at all costs. They don't want to sit with their thoughts because their thoughts remind them of their emptiness. When you stop giving them noise to distract themselves with, they're left with their own internal silence, which feels like exposure. It highlights the fact that their confidence was never real. It was borrowed from the people they could provoke. So when you go silent, they go inward. But what they find there is uncomfortable, unstable, and impossible to control. In the end, your silence does what confrontation never could. It reveals who they are without your attention and who you become without their influence. Your withdrawal forces a narcissist to face something they spend their entire life running from, their own insignificance. As long as you are present, reacting, giving energy, they can convince themselves that they matter more than they actually do. They interpret your availability as proof of their superiority. But when you walk away quietly, without trying to fix anything, without questioning them, without begging for clarity, you remove the illusion that they built around themselves. Suddenly, they're confronted with a version of themselves that isn't adored, isn't prioritized, and isn't needed. And that realization hits them harder than any argument could. Narcissists survive by outsourcing their sense of worth to the people around them. They don't generate self-esteem from within, so they constantly harvest it from others. When you were present, they fed on your attention, your emotions, your desire to make the relationship work. All of that validated them, all of that made them feel important. But the moment you withdraw that supply, their internal landscape becomes barren. It's like taking away the only oxygen mask they have. They didn't appreciate it when they had it because they believed it would always be there. When it disappears, they feel a painful void they don't know how to fill on their own. Your absence also forces them to confront a truth they refuse to accept. People can move on without them. Narcissists operate under the delusion that they are unforgettable, that no one would ever choose to leave them by choice. They assume they're the center of your emotional world, so when you disappear, it contradicts everything they believe about themselves. This contradiction creates a mental spiral. They start wondering if they misjudged their own value. They wonder if someone else is giving you what they couldn't. They wonder if you finally saw through them. These questions bruise their ego because they're not used to being the one left behind. Your withdrawal also exposes a deeper insecurity they hide carefully. Narcissists secretly fear they're ordinary, unremarkable, or replaceable. They build their confidence by making others feel dependent on them. When you walk away, you break that dependency. You prove that their charm, manipulation, or emotional games weren't as powerful as they believed. That realization cuts through their ego like nothing else. It leaves them questioning their own worth in a way they can't admit out loud. Your distance becomes a mirror, one they can't control and one they can't escape, reflecting a truth they never wanted to see about themselves. Narcissists fear losing the audience more than losing the person because their sense of self is performance-based. For them, relationships are less about connection and more about spectatorship. They thrive when someone watches, reacts, admires, or competes for their attention. The reactions you give are their fuel, their evidence that they matter, and their proof that they are in control. If the audience disappears, even temporarily, they experience a kind of panic that goes beyond disappointment. It feels like an existential threat to who they think they are. They are terrified not of being left, but of being unseen, ignored, and irrelevant. When you step away and stop providing the emotional responses they expect, they enter a state of confusion and hypervigilance. Their mind races to decode what is happening. Did I do something wrong? Are they really gone? Will I ever get their attention back? This scramble is not about missing you. It's about missing the validation, the confirmation that they are powerful, irresistible, and superior. Without an audience, their carefully constructed identity falters. And that is deeply uncomfortable because they are not used to generating self-worth internally. This fear of losing the audience also explains why narcissists are relentless in their attempts to reclaim attention. They will push, pull, and manipulate to test whether you can be reactivated as their observer. They may guilt trip, charm, or provoke, all in an effort to see that familiar response that reassures them they still exist in someone else's emotional world. Their strategies are not personal, they are mechanical, designed to restore the feedback loop they depend on. When you disappear instead of chasing, you break that loop, leaving them exposed and powerless. The disappearance of the audience forces them to face their own fragility. They are confronted with the realization that their self-worth is fragile, dependent, and easily disrupted. This is why narcissists often escalate behaviors when they sense your withdrawal. They are desperate to prevent invisibility because being ignored threatens the very foundation of their ego. They may try to create drama, provoke jealousy, or reassert dominance. But internally, every action is driven by fear. Fear of irrelevance, fear of exposure, and fear of losing the carefully maintained image that keeps them feeling superior. Ultimately, the absence of your attention is a mirror showing the narcissist their true dependency. They can't bear the silence because silence reveals that their power was never absolute. It was borrowed, contingent, and entirely dependent on your presence and reactions. Distance removes their emotional leverage over you because narcissists operate on control, manipulation, and predictable reactions. They rely on being able to influence how you feel, think, and act to maintain a sense of superiority. Every argument, every withdrawal, every subtle provocation is a calculated attempt to pull you into their orbit, to remind you and themselves that they hold the strings. When you create distance, you interrupt that system. Suddenly, they no longer have the automatic access to your emotions that once fueled their ego. Your detachment neutralizes their strategies and exposes the limits of their influence. When you stop responding the way they expect, stopping the chase, ignoring provocations, or setting firm boundaries, you remove the levers they normally pull to manipulate outcomes. Narcissists are skilled at predicting human behavior because most people react emotionally to their games. But distance changes the equation entirely. Without your predictable reactions, they lose the ability to coerce, guilt, or intimidate effectively. Their manipulations fail because there is no longer a reaction to exploit. They may try harder, escalate tactics, or attempt to create new ways to reassert control, but the fundamental power dynamic has shifted. Your autonomy becomes a shield against their influence. This loss of leverage is destabilizing for a narcissist because it undermines the core of their identity, the belief that they are indispensable, central, and commanding. They rely on the idea that people will bend toward them, chase after them, or seek their approval. Distance proves them wrong. It forces them to confront the fact that their control is conditional, temporary, and in this case, ineffective. It's a direct threat to their ego because they have constructed their self-worth on being able to orchestrate and dominate the emotions of others. Moreover, distance creates a space for clarity, both for you and for them. For you, it allows emotional boundaries and independence. For them, it becomes a mirror reflecting their dependence on your attention. They begin to realize that the emotional power they thought they possessed was borrowed, that it only existed as long as you allowed it to exist. This is why narcissists often respond with confusion, frustration, or desperate attempts to regain access. They are experiencing firsthand the vulnerability they've long avoided, and your distance leaves them powerless to fix it. When you stop chasing a narcissist, they start doubting their power because their sense of control is built entirely on predictability and external validation. They are accustomed to people reacting exactly the way they expect, seeking their approval, defending them, apologizing for perceived mistakes, or trying to restore harmony after being manipulated. each reaction feeds their ego and reinforces their belief that they are in charge. But when you withdraw, when you refuse to play the game, the predictable pattern they rely on is broken. Suddenly, they are faced with a situation they cannot compute, someone who does not respond according to their design. This unpredictability triggers intense self-doubt because their entire identity as a dominant, influential presence depends on manipulating reactions, and now they are unable to. Narcissists' doubt manifests in different ways. Some may replay past interactions obsessively, questioning whether they misjudged their own worth, their actions, or even your loyalty. Others may attempt subtle tests to gauge whether your distance is permanent, seeking any indication that they still hold sway. The key is that doubt seeps into their perception of themselves. The very foundation of their inflated ego begins to crack because they are forced to confront a reality they have meticulously avoided. They are not invincible, and their influence is not absolute. Your absence exposes the fragility of their power in a way that confrontation, arguments, or emotional escalation never could. This self-doubt is psychologically destabilizing for a narcissist because it challenges their core belief that they are in control. They are forced to recognize that their charm, manipulation, or coercion cannot guarantee outcomes, that people can make independent choices that defy their expectations. It undermines the illusion of superiority they have carefully constructed and maintained, leaving them vulnerable to insecurity and anxiety. Even if they mask it outwardly, inside, they are scrambling to understand how someone they expected to chase them has instead disappeared. Ultimately, your refusal to chase forces a narcissist to face a reality they were never prepared to accept. Their power is contingent, their influence is limited, and their sense of control is not absolute. The doubt that arises in their mind is a direct result of the very boundaries you have set, and it is one of the most effective ways to reclaim authority over your own emotional space while quietly destabilizing theirs. Your disappearance is the strongest boundary you can set because it communicates power without argument, clarity without explanation, and finality without drama. Narcissists are used to negotiating, provoking, and manipulating to get what they want. They are accustomed to people bending, explaining, justifying, or chasing. When you disappear instead of responding, you bypass all their tactics. Your absence becomes a declaration that your emotional energy, your attention, and your time are no longer available for manipulation. It's not just a physical withdrawal, it's a psychological one that removes their leverage entirely. By stepping away, you create a boundary that cannot be crossed or negotiated. Narcissists test limits constantly, pushing to see how far they can go, but your disappearance is unbreachable. You are no longer part of their performance loop, no longer a source of validation or ego reinforcement. This act of self-preservation forces them to confront the reality that they cannot control everything, that not every outcome bends to their will. Your boundary is both invisible and undeniable. It is absence, silence, and refusal wrapped into one. Disappearing also flips the dynamic entirely. Narcissists thrive on reaction. They measure their power by how you respond. When you remove the response, you remove their mirror. They begin to project, question, and overanalyze because the predictable patterns that fed their sense of superiority are gone. Your disappearance forces them to reckon with their own limitations and insecurities in a way that confrontation cannot. It makes them face the truth that their influence is conditional, temporary, and entirely dependent on the cooperation of others. Finally, this boundary is transformative for you. It empowers you to reclaim autonomy, focus on your own growth, and maintain emotional equilibrium. By disappearing, you are not only protecting yourself from manipulation, you are demonstrating that your worth is independent of anyone else's validation. It is a boundary that teaches them a lesson. Control and attention are privileges, not entitlements. And sometimes the most effective response is not a reaction, but a deliberate withdrawal that shifts the balance of power entirely in your favor. In the end, walking away from a narcissist is not just an act of self-preservation. It is a profound statement of power. Every silence, every step back, every refusal to chase dismantles the illusions they built around control, superiority, and inevitability. By disappearing, you break their predictable cycles, expose their insecurities, and remove the emotional fuel they relied on. You force them to face a reality they never imagined possible, that their influence is limited, their charm is not absolute, and their power depends entirely on the willingness of others to feed it. Your withdrawal transforms the dynamic entirely. You are no longer a player in their game. You are the one who sets the rules. Boundaries become unbreachable, your autonomy undeniable, and your emotional strength unshakable. The very act of disappearing becomes the most effective lesson they could ever learn. You cannot be controlled, manipulated, or diminished by someone who depends on external validation to feel whole. Ultimately, this is not about revenge, confrontation, or proving a point. It is about reclaiming yourself, your energy, your clarity, and your peace. It is about showing without words that your worth is independent, your choices are sovereign, and your presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. When you step away, you do more than escape a toxic cycle. You shift the balance of power entirely, leaving the narcissist to confront a truth they cannot manipulate. You are gone, and nothing they do can bring you back unless you choose it. Disappearance is not weakness. It is the ultimate assertion of strength, the quiet but unshakable statement that your life, your mind, and your energy belong to no one but you.